Hi, so as you just heard, my name is Matt Nix, and I created the USA Network show Burn Notice, which is currently in its sixth season and just premiered last week. And I also created a show on the Fox network called The Good Guys, which ran for a year and is no longer on. And I'm a writer, producer, and director, and what I want to talk about today is this: what making television taught me about art. Now, you're sitting out there and you're thinking, the theme of this TEDx conference is a sense of place. Is this television writer twisting the theme of this TEDx conference so that he can talk about television writing? And the answer is yes, kind of. But on a deeper level, I do think it is related, because I am from this place. I'm from Sonoma County. And what I'm interested in is how you start with that sense of place, that sense of who you are, and develop that into a creative voice, and use that creative voice in your art. I'm not necessarily saying that television is great art. What I am saying is that television is a creative endeavor that requires a creative voice to do it well. And for the purposes of this conversation, I am interested in where that creative voice comes from. Now, ultimately, that creative voice may be packaged and processed and used to fill the space between car commercials. But it starts in a much more elemental place that I believe is common to all art. And that is this central question of, what do you want to say? Now, when you're starting out as an artist, particularly as a writer, you're given a particular piece of advice. And it's a piece of advice that I really tried to follow when I started my work in television. And that is this: write what you know. It's a great idea, and I really tried to do it, but there's a problem with it. It doesn't work particularly well in television, because when you break it down, what do you really know? In my case, I knew some research that I had done on spies. There were some things that I learned in college, slept through some of them, was paying attention for others. There was a book that I read in 4th grade about spies, and so that was sort of the sum total of what I knew about spies. And the thing about television is it moves very fast. Television is a very hungry medium. In order to do it successfully and have a financially successful show, you need to do over 100 episodes. On a network, you're doing between 20 and 24 episodes a year. On cable, you're doing as many as 18 episodes a year. And a new episode is due every 7 or 8 days. And the upshot of all of this is that you run out of things you know very, very quickly. And the problem for me, I found in that first year of working on Burn Notice, is you're not allowed to call the network and say, listen, I'm doing this thing where I write what I know. I have run out of things that I know. I would like to stop making the television program just for a little while so I can learn some more stuff and then write what I know again. That is not allowed. You have to come up with a new television show every week. And so that's what I did. I just sort of muddled through. I figured out new things, I did a little bit of new research, and I figured out a way to keep the television program going until the end of the season. Okay? And at that point, an interesting thing happened. People started talking about my creative voice. Now, be clear, some people liked my creative voice, and some people hated my creative voice. But one thing they all agreed on was that I had a creative voice, which up to that point, I was not so sure about. And so it got me curious, and I looked back at the season, and I started wondering, where did this come from? When did this emerge? What is this creative voice that people are saying that I have? And the first clue as to the source of this creative voice came from another thing that people liked to tell me in that first year of making television, which is, you know, Matt, you are like the less good-looking version of the lead on your television program. And if you look at it, it's kind of true. You'll note sort of similar facial structure, both have the kind of sharp noses, that kind of thing. It's just that the guy on the right, now stay with me, is better looking than the guy on the left. Also sort of sounds like me, right? So I thought, okay, maybe this is just a coincidence. So I checked out the leads on my other show, The Good Guys. And you'll note 3 guys with kind of high hairlines, similar smiles. If you add up the guy on the left and the guy on the right, you pretty much get the guy in the middle. So that's interesting, and it led me to wonder, all right, is it just me? Is this just me parading my overweenning ego for all to see? Now, perhaps, okay? But it led me to look at other television show creators that I knew or knew of, and I found an interesting thing. Let's take a look. Here's Sean Ryan, the lead actor in The Shield, and the creator of The Shield, and there is his lead actor, Michael Chiklis. All right. Here is Shonda Rhimes, who created Scandal, and there is her lead actress, Kerry Washington. Interesting, we're noticing a pattern. Another of the great bald showrunners, Nick Santora, lead actor Dominic Lombardozzi. There's Matt Weiner, growing more hair and turning into John Hamm. And finally, there's Emily Kapnick of Suburgatory, turning into the TV version of Emily Kapnick on Suburgatory. So clearly, it's not just me. This is not a universal phenomenon, but you will find, if you look at the creators of television shows, most of the time we're putting better-looking versions of ourselves on television. Which led me to wonder, is this just about a look? Is that all it is? And after that first year in television, I had the occasion to look back at my work and take a look at what I had written and what it was really about. And on one level, of course, it was about a spy who runs around Miami blowing things up. But what I found when I really looked at it was about a spy who likes leading a small team of highly skilled friends to do a high-pressure job. A little bit like a first-year showrunner who's hired a bunch of his friends to write a show with him, doing this high-pressure job. It was also about a spy who sometimes acts like a sarcastic jerk, but is a pretty nice guy underneath. Also, as my wife will tell you, sort of like me, who worries a lot about his relationship between his work life and his family, which is definitely true of a brand new showrunner who is dealing with a 100-hour-a-week job, who goes to great lengths not to let people down under any circumstances. Very important to me in that first year when I am trying to keep this show on the air and keep the 250-some-odd people who are working on it employed. And last, a guy who tends to get his work assignments done in a gigantic burst of energy just before they are due, which, if you call the studio and the network, they will tell you was exactly who I was in the first year of working on my television show. So, if you look at that, what you realize is none of that is stuff that I know. In fact, it's quite specifically stuff that I didn't know, certainly not when I started. What it is distilled essence of me. And this led me to the first really important thing that I learned about making art from making television, which is you don't write what you know, you express who you are. And one of the things that I am is a guy who can't operate a PowerPoint presentation terribly well. And so that was a really important realization for me. And I think it's an interesting thing, and it's useful, ultimately. It can be useful. But there's sort of an obvious question, which is how do you do that? How do you get there? Well, the great thing about television is it guides you right there. And the way it does it is when you get into television, you have to up your workload a lot. The year before I went into television, I was a feature writer, and a pretty prolific one. And the year before I went into television, I wrote about 350 pages of feature scripts and turned them into various studios, a full-time job. But the first year that I went into television, I had to up that in 2007 to 700 pages, plus casting, production, and post-production. Now, I had a writing staff, so it was a little bit easier, but when you have to put all of that on the air, it adds up to an enormous increase in workload. In the next year, in 2008, there were 1,300 pages produced. And by 2010, the year that I had 2 shows on the air and a TV movie, it had increased to 2,400 pages produced. And I discovered in the crush of all of this work a really wonderful thing that I want to share with all of you, which is that the things that hold us back as creative beings, the things that are stopping you from expressing who you really are in your creative work, can be bludgeoned into submission with an enormous amount of work. It turns out that one of the things that is holding you back as an artist is you're sleeping too much and you have too much free time. But that can be fixed. That is not a problem. And it's a wonderful thing when you do it, because as you increase your workload, what you find is that artifice, anxiety, writer's block, all of those things fall away in the single-minded crush to get all of that work done. And it's a pretty amazing thing. And that led me to the second really important thing that I learned about making art from television, which is that a good way to do it is figure out how much work you can reasonably do, double it, and then double it again. Now, this really works, I promise you. It is a terrific technique for breaking through your artistic barriers. The problem is that it's a pretty hard thing to do. It's a little bit like going to the gym and resolving to work out 4 times as much. It's one of those promises that's very hard to keep when you make it to yourself. But fortunately, television has a great way of handling this problem. Television is full of an incredible resource that motivates artists to do their best work, and that resource is fear. Raw, unadulterated fear. The television industry is full of people to fear. It's full of television executives and actors and agents, and most of all, it is filled with the millions of people who are watching your work and just waiting to say mean things about you on the internet if they don't like it. Now, this can seem intimidating at first, but the truth is these people are incredibly important. These people are your creative partners. Because as we all know, there are 2 things that motivate people in life. There's the carrot and the stick. And if you're working in a creative industry, if you want to do something creative, the carrot's easy. It's doing something creative. It's working in a medium that you love, doing something that you really care about. But what you need is the stick for those moments when the carrot seems like a far-off dream, and you never really liked carrots anyway. That's when you need the stick. And this led me to the second great realization that I had about art from television, which is that it's really important to share your work with people you fear. Now, this isn't just something that you can do in television. The wonderful thing about fear is it's this amazing free resource. All you have to do is reach out and grab some fear for yourself. And the way you do it is you find someone that you respect, someone whose opinion you really value, and you make an appointment with them to share your creative work. And you make sure that the date of that appointment cannot be changed. I'd like you to imagine that now. And that feeling that you're feeling in the pit of your stomach, that's fear. Right? Now you really have something. Now you have the prospect in your future of humiliation and regret. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Your job now is to use that and make that your ally to make yourself work harder and do your absolute best work. Now, you may be saying, "Say, Matt, this doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun," and you'd be right. One of the things that I found when I first went into television was that there's a lot of being up late at night at 2 o'clock in the morning, and everybody's screaming at you, and you're in double overtime, and everybody's going to get fired. And you've got a script due the next day. And what I found was that it's at that moment that you ask yourself, why am I doing this? And what I realized was I was doing this because it was something that I really loved. Because the thing that I was making was more important to me than the unhappiness that I was feeling in the moment. And that's a really important thing, I think, when you're making art. And I think that it's something that people often misunderstand. When they say that I love making art, what they mean is I like making art a lot. And that's a great thing, and sometimes I like making art a lot. All artists do. But the problem is it's not terribly sustainable, because when you like doing something a lot and it ceases to be likable, you stop doing it, which is a perfectly logical thing to do, but does not bode well for your creative career. And I think this is something that anybody who's ever had children can attest to. When children are being likable, they are easy to like. It is important to love your children for those moments when they are not being likable. When it is the middle of the night and they are screaming and crying and throwing up on you. And the wonderful gift that television gave me was the realization that I did love my work unconditionally. And why did I realize that? Because television likes to wake up in the middle of the night and scream and cry and throw up on you. It is a fantastic thing. And that led me to the next thing that I learned, which is you have to learn to love your art even when it doesn't love you back. Now, let's say you like all of these ideas that I'm saying. Let's say you're willing to do all of these things. We still come back to the central question of what do you want to say? And this is another thing that I think people sometimes misunderstand. People are under the impression that you need to know what you want to say before you start speaking. And that's really tragic, because that's what stops most people from making art. That's what stops most people from expressing themselves. It's perfectly logical to say, well, I don't know what I'm going to say, so I'm not going to say anything at all. But ultimately, you're not going to make anything worthwhile if you have that attitude. And television, again, gives you a great way past this, which is when you sell a television show, you're not actually selling a television show. A television show is a series of episodes that takes place over many years. What you're selling is an idea. And when a network orders that television show, they're basically saying, we will collaborate with you over the course of many years to discover what this television show is, and to discover with you what it is you want to say. And I found when I looked back over my first year of working in television that I had started out with something to say about a guy in sunglasses who runs around Miami blowing up cars. But over the course of that season, I had said much more. I had discovered that I had something to say about work, about relationships, about what it is to be moral in the world. And this led me to the last thing that I learned about making art from television, which is you don't choose your voice. Your creative voice is a lot like your speaking voice. It's given to you. It usually changes between adolescence and adulthood. But ultimately, it's not something you create. It's something that you find. And in finding mine, I realized that that was really the central job of an artist, to find your voice and to honor it once you've found it. Now, I realize that most people in the audience will never be television writers, nor should you be. I do not want the competition, thank you very much. But the truth is, all of the things that I've said today don't really have anything to do with television. They're just the things that you learn when you take your creative work seriously and you bet your life and your livelihood on it. That has been television's great gift to me. And over the years, I've realized that the great thing about television is that it isn't the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. A television is just an electronic box that demands to be fed 42 minutes and 10 seconds worth of material every week. And whenever I turn to that electronic box with the questions that are burning in my soul, questions like, am I an artist? What do I really have to say? How do I take this sense of place, this sense of who I am, and turn that into something transcendent and important and worthy of my life and my career? The electronic box always has the same answer for me, which is shut up and feed me. Just do your work, and the art will take care of itself. Thank you.